Hello everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm James, and today I'm going to be doing an open box review and setup of this FMS 80mm EDF F-86 Sabre RC jet. Alright, so this is how the plane is shipped to you. At least it's how it was shipped to me from FMS. Let's take a look at the side of the box and some of the specs on it, and then we'll go ahead and open this thing up. So here once again is the 80mm F-86 Sabre PNP, meaning it's a plug and play, meaning that this plane comes, you do have to assemble it, but all of the electronics are installed except for your own batteries. You'll have to supply your own receiver and transmitter, but it comes with the servos installed, the landing gear installed, and of course the EDF is installed, and so on. So in any case, so it comes in two variants. It comes in the Huff, this is the one that I have here. It also comes in the Sky Blazer. I'll show you that. And this is just basically the box here, of course, made in China. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer. FMS supplied this to me to do a review of. I'm not being paid for this, but they did supply the plane for me to give this a review. Okay, so if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I traditionally have been building RC planes either from kits, and more recently I'm building an RC plane from a plan. It's the Aeromite. I got this big knife here. And I've been doing this for several years on my channel. Maybe this is a little more reasonable. I've been doing this for several years on my channel, and all the planes that I've built have been glow powered or gas powered. And you know, I've been building kits for a long time, and I came across a little while ago, I came across a few companies that actually produce RC jet kits, balsa kits. And I've never flown jets. I've never flown EDF jets. And I thought, you know what, maybe this will be a little bit something different. Kind of conveniently, at the same time, I've been approached by a few companies to do some reviews of jets like this one. Here's this, boy. And so it sort of worked out okay. And this has given me an opportunity to actually learn a little bit something about EDF jets. I think my next build is going to be building an RC jet plane out of a kit. But in the meantime, I'm going to continue on with my build of the Aeromite RC plane. Check that out. Check out those videos. It's an in-process build. Here is the box, and we'll take it out of this cardboard box in which they shipped it in. As I mentioned, it comes in two variants. This is not the one that I have in the box here. I have the Huff. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. And you know, this is actually, I've done some looking in some other reviews about this kit, and this thing gets really good reviews. I'm going to take a look at it, and I'm going to be 100% honest with you about what I think about it. And again, you know, FMS, thank you very much for supplying this, but I am going to be telling what I think of it, be honest with it, with everybody. Okay, so let's go ahead and get it out of this outer box, and we'll take a look at the actual box itself. But boy, it actually is a very beautiful plane. And if you know anything about history of planes, aviation, military aviation, this is a classic icon swept wing fighter. This was the first American, production swept wing fighter that came out after World War II, and obviously it is famous for its role in the Korean War, going up against the MiG-15, and that again is an iconic sort of duel between the MiG-15 and the F-86 during the Korean War. But this is just a beautiful plane, and I'm really looking forward to taking a look at this thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a quick little tour of what's printed on the outside of the box. On this side here, we have, again, the F-86, the Sky Blazers color scheme. We already saw this side just a few seconds ago. And then what do we have over here? On this side, okay, it's showing the two color variants. And again, in this box, we have the Huff right there. Let's see what's on the back here. Oops, knocking stuff over. Oh, there goes my engine. Oops, there goes my little OS engine there. Let me move this over here. Okay, and on this side of the box, we have three different languages with details in those languages, which I can't help you out with. I think this one is German, this one is French, and this one is Chinese. And here is a nice detail looking at the air brake, and look at those details inside of there. And then the landing gear and the doors, and there is a drop tank back there. And of course, here is the cockpit and the canopy. And then the bottom of the box has a bunch of details. Let's flip it over and take a look at that. And then one thing that's not noted here on the box cover is that this is a 6-channel RC plane, meaning that you have to have a 6-channel system, which is going to be your elevator, your rudder, your ailerons, your throttle, which is your ESC, your flaps, and then your landing gear. So yeah, again, you will need a 6-channel radio to operate this plane. So now we can move on to some of these other details. It does have working landing gear with landing gear doors. It has air brakes, navigation and landing lights. They say fuel tanks and a scaled cockpit. One thing I did want to mention about that is those fuel tanks are basically these are drop tanks. I did see a review where someone was calling these bombs. Those are not bombs, they're drop tanks. And I also saw a review where someone mentioned that of the detail of the dashboard in here, that is actually an instrument panel on an airplane. So any case, no big deal. And you know, we all get things wrong from time to time. Has shock absorbing full metal landing gear. That's pretty cool. And then it also has what they call here a pressing buckle design latch for the canopy. And that's basically right here. You can hardly see it, but there's a little button in there and it's going to pop open the canopy. So it's a pretty nice feature. And then it talks a little bit about the packaging and then some of the weathering and the finish. I think these are all decals. So we'll check that out here in just a minute. Oops, I'm sorry. I did want to mention one more time a few things that you are going to need. Again, this is a plug and play, but you are going to need your own transmitter. I'm just going to use this old Futaba. You're going to need your own receiver. Again, I'm just going to be using a matching Futaba receiver for that. And you also need to supply your own batteries. I'll go over the batteries in just, when we get into opening the box and such, but I'm going to use these Liperior. This is a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. We'll get into that. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull this out. Let's see how it's packaged. Boy, it's a nice sturdy foam carton. Boy. There we go. Let's go ahead and get this out of the way. All right, well, to start out with, we can see that this is very nicely packed. It's very sturdy and looks like all the parts are nice and secure for shipping. So that's sort of comforting, right, when you buy a plane like this. So here is the instruction manual here. We'll go over this in just a few minutes. But yeah, here's the looking down on the case here. So let me go ahead and cut these tape here and we'll open it up and start pulling the parts out. Okay, once again, here's our manual and it has several different languages in here, and I don't think there's a whole bunch of steps, but we'll take a look at that in just a minute. I'll set this aside. One thing I did want to mention is they do give you this little card here. This is just a customer service support card, nothing on the back, but it just has a support email and a phone number and even office hours there. So this is from FMS again. So yeah, very nice that they include some simple ways to get a hold of them. Let's go ahead and start cutting this stuff out of here. Here's a little, I don't know what's in here. Oh, that's just a little foam. There's nothing there. That's just a little bit of packing material. Let's go ahead and pop this out carefully. So here is the, I guess this is going to be the left wing. Very nice with the landing gear obviously already installed there. Then we have our flaps and our ailerons, and here's our servos already installed in the wing. We'll have to make adjustments to those. And one thing I did want to point out is these hinges are not like they're not CA hinges or nylon kind of flat hinges. These are, I guess, sort of mechanical hinges, or you can see that there's probably a wire or something in here. So a very strong hinge system. That's pretty cool. And just look at that. So it's how it's rounded in there. It looks very nice. Look at that thing. That's actually really very nice. Here's the flap. So the flap has just sort of a, I guess it's connected here. It doesn't have the same type of hinge system here, but here is the flap. And okay, so we'll go ahead and take a look at this in a little bit more detail. Let's go ahead and get it out. Move it over here carefully out of the way. And here is our second wing. Wheel already installed on here. Boy, it's very nice and solid. I mean, this is just a hard rubber and very nicely detailed. Look at that wheel. That's pretty nice. Okay, let's go ahead and move this over here again. Here are some, looks like some wiring harnesses, and these are, look like some kind of cables for something. We'll take a look at this in just a minute. A little hardware package. Okay, wow, there we go. There's the fuselage and stuff. Let's go ahead and start bringing some of this out. These are the drop tanks, and these just plug in somehow onto the wing. We'll figure that out. There's a drop tank here, and there's one over here. Again, these are not bombs, but they're just drop tanks. Pretty cool. I'll move this over here. Here is our elevator. and they have their own dedicated servos for each side here. Here's the connections for that elevator. And again, that same hinge system, that sort of mechanical, I guess, I don't know how that works, probably a wire in there, but yeah, very nice how that, very clean how that is connected there. Look at that, that's really nice. The paint job doesn't go all the way inside the hinge. That'd be a little bit nicer there, because when you're doing this, you'll see that, but oh well. They could have painted the whole thing, that would have been nicer. But yeah, the control horns are already installed. Oh yeah, these are like little ball links on the control horns here. So there you can see those will attach to the servos. Let's go ahead and set this aside. But very nice detail. It's got some nice panel lines. Here is our rudder. Again, here's a connection for the rudder servo, which is down in here. Here's the rudder servo. Same type of hinge system. But very nice detail. And here is the fuselage is in two parts. Let me go ahead and bring out this rear part here. This is just the tail section. There's a couple lights you can see right in here. We'll check those out. All right, nice. And there it is. Again, very nice detail. Look at the vent, the intake vent here. Here are the spoilers, or the air brakes, I should say. We'll see how those operate. Inside here is our EDF, buried down inside the fuselage here. Very solid. Here's our huff marking. And then here are landing gear doors. And then the front landing gear, very, very clean. Look how nice it closes up. It's very clean the way it's set up here. So yeah. And then one thing I did want to point out again is here is that the connections for the servos, they just have these little plugs, as you can see here. Looks almost like an old VGA plug or something that you plug each of the wings into. We'll show you that in just a minute here. And then here is our cockpit. Some of the detail on the cockpit here. You can kind of see this weathering, and kind of a nice pilot in there. Some nice detail with the cockpit. All right, let's go ahead and put this back. And then back here, I think we have a reinforcement. I don't know if this is a carbon fiber tube or fiberglass tube or something, but this is the reinforcement for the wing. Gives strength to the wing. Yeah, it looks like it's probably just a piece of like a fiberglass tube. But that's just that's going to go through. It's going to plug through the fuselage into the wings to add some strength. Okay, so I just found this in the box also. This looks like it's a little quality control certificate or something here. Most of it's in Chinese, I think. And in any case, that's showing you sort of their level of quality control that they're trying to achieve. That's nice to see. So again, here are the parts all laid out, and there's not too many of them, and I think the assembly is going to go relatively quickly. We'll see. But yeah, a lot of nice detail. So once I get it all constructed, my goal here is I'll get it put together, and then once we get it all set up and put together, we'll look at some of the features as the plane is finished. So here's the manual again, and it is a printed manual, and you can get this in PDF, in a PDF file from their website. If you're interested in that, you can download it, and you can download it before you purchase the plane, and you can also download other manuals from the other planes, so you can check them out before you purchase them if you're interested in that. So go to the FMS website, you can download these manuals. So again, here it is, and I'm not going to go over it in great detail. One thing I wanted to point out in the specs, because I didn't do it earlier, I did mention my battery, but the recommended battery is a 22.2 volt, 4,000 to 5,500 milliamp hour battery at 45C. I think mine is a 60C that I have over there. So again, here are the parts, and then they have, like I said, they do have 3 different versions, I think language versions. They have French and German and Chinese. So actually, if you look at the total instructions for this thing real quick here, I'm going to see where it ends. Yeah, so your total instructions to assemble this is 15 pages minus the sort of introduction stuff. So it's not a lot to do here to get this thing put together. Okay, so let's look at it real quick here. I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of the details, but I did want to show you that they do give you step-by-step instructions on setting it up, and we'll check that out as we go. Here are some of the connections for the electronics. They do have these extra features again. They have like this, for example, this is just an antenna, and this is also an antenna here. Those are just scale features that they give you. And here they talk about the channels and the receiver setup. And then the time we get over here, we're talking about the setup for the for your radio and the directions of the movement of the control surfaces and such. And then here they talk about your high and your low rates for your control surfaces. They also talk about how to set up your servos relative to the control horns to get the different movement you want. If you want more movement or less movement, how to set up the linkages on the arms and the horns and the holes. And you know, depending on where you are, like it says here, look at it closely here. A lot of people know this already, but if you put it on, you know, you put it on your outer hole on your servo and the inner hole or the lower hole on your control surface, you're going to get more control. And then the opposite is if you put it on the lower hole for your servo and on the furthest hole on the control horn, you're going to get less control. And then everything in between that, you'll get variations of that. So that's nice of them to kind of tell you that. That's good to know, especially if you've never put together a plane like this. It's interesting, or it's very important to understand sort of how the servos and control horns operate relative to each other. Then here's the center of gravity or the balancing point. They show you there. And then they go over some of the pre-flight information, and then some of the flying and characteristics and some of the maintenance and such. And then a troubleshooting section here. They also give you some information on the ESC, and then we're into the German part, so I think we're good. Yeah, okay. Some information here on the ESC again, is setting it up, and some troubleshooting information and all that. Oops, well, I forgot to mention one thing, and is they do give you a set of water slide decals of stencils. And stencils are the instructions that are painted on the fuselage. You'll see them a lot on planes, right? If you look closely at planes, look at pictures of planes and such, if you're not familiar with them. These are just instructions that are painted all over the plane, and these instructions are for the ground crew, for the pilot, for the maintenance crew, and so on and so forth. And just giving information about what to do and where to do it, and things to open, things to close, things to connect to, things to do and things not to do, all that type of thing. And it's nice that they provide these to you. That's an additional level of detail, and there's a lot here, as you can see. The thing about it, though, which I noticed, is that they don't give you an index sheet to tell you where to put them. So if you do want to add this scale, you know, a little bit more realism to your plane here, you're going to have to do your own research and figure out where all these things go. Probably isn't too hard to look at some pictures and such and try to get some references for this, but so you'll have to spend some time if you want to do it accurately. I mean, you could just use the water slide decals and stick them wherever you want, but then that wouldn't be very scale, and that probably wouldn't look very nice. But in any case, they do provide those to you, and I think it's actually a very nice feature that they give you in this kit. It really does add a lot of detail. So yeah, pretty cool. Okay, so step one is to install what they call the wing spar. And this just slides right through here. And then it has these little elastic bands to hold down the doors, as you see here. That's just for shipping, to protect them during shipping. So we'll pull those off. And since we're going to need it, might as well empty out our little hardware bag here. Again, it has these two scale features. These are antennae that are going to be placed on the fuselage at some point. We'll just put these in here. And then, of course, we have a little harness, wiring harness there. Set that aside, and then we have a bunch of little screws, and then our control rods here. So I will need screws here in just a few minutes. Put those out in there. Just be careful that you don't leave anything inside a bag, and I would suggest set your bags up to the side. So if just for some reason you miss something when you're taking them out of the bags, don't throw the bag away until you're done putting the plane together. There we go. Okay, so there's our hardware. Not a lot here. And then step number 2 is just to install the wings. We're going to press down the landing gear doors and then slide the wings on. And as I mentioned before, they plug in. There's a little electronic plug here. Again, it looks to me like a little VGA, old VGA connection here. There's one in the wing, as you can see here. And then you just plug it in to make sure it fits into the one in the fuselage. And that's all you have to do to connect the servos into the system there. So let's go ahead and slide this on. Careful with the wheel. And then they tell you to push these down as you do that. And that'll hold them in place. There we go, there's that one. I just want to make sure that my spar is sort of seated all the way to the back of that one wing over there. Now we'll slide it in on this one. Carefully. And it is a very tight fit. It's a snug fit and it feels very strong, but you want to be careful. You want to make sure you get those seams, as you can see here, closed up, because you need the holes to align for the screws that we're going to be using to attach the wing, or at least to hold it onto the fuselage. So I'm just kind of working it against the fuselage, kind of pressing gently. You know, it is foam, but this is actually really pretty sturdy. It feels actually like a kind of like a board almost. But yeah, very nice. And just make sure it's all the way in so that your screws, the holes are lined up so that you don't strip anything or put anything in crooked. I think that's pretty good. And then for the screws, you will need a hex key to put them in. And again, I'm going to be very careful. I want to make sure, I'm going to go ahead and put them in each hole first. Just let them sit in there just to hold them. And I'm carefully going to screw them in. You just want to make sure you don't put them in crooked or strip them. You know, just take your time for stuff like this, because you don't want to mess that up. But so what I'll do is I'm going to go around each one of these. I'm going to get them kind of snugged in, not completely tight. Then I'll go around and I'll tighten them up in the end. I like to kind of do things a little bit at a time. Make sure everything's sort of seated properly and fitting properly before I do like a final tightening down. That's just the way I like to do it. So the next step is to install this sort of tail section, but before we do that, I do want to look inside here, take a look at the motor and the EDF back in here. So there it is. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this over, because we are going to have to slide these through as we do this, and they actually are on the upper part of the fuselage. So let me go ahead and flip the plane over. So what we have to do here carefully is we have to feed the elevator and rudder wires through this little channel. As you can see right in there. Kind of hard to see because it's dark in there. That little channel just basically goes through here and brings the wires into the stabilizer, the horizontal stabilizer area, which eventually get plugged in to connect everything. And then this wire here is just for your LED lights. There's LED lights on the back here for your landing lights and such. And it's going to have to come back through into this compartment anyhow, so it's going to have to come through here. Just pull that back there, and now we can go ahead and slide these in. Kind of have to do it all at once, it looks like, so just a little bit of trickery here. There. Bring those through. And as you can see here, real quick, you can see here, this is where the screws are going to be attaching through the fuselage. There's these little places where you're going to screw those in. Okay, there they go. Hold on to those and push this in, just like that. So now we can go ahead and flip this over here, because the screws, in order to attach it, one is located on the bottom of the plane, right in here. Then the other two are actually inside of the air brake door, or air brake compartments, I should say. So in order to get to those screws, what we have to do is we actually have to set up our radio, at least for the flaps and air brakes, so that we can pop those open and then access the points where we can screw in this rear section. So let me go ahead and do that. Let me go ahead and set up my radio real quick, at least with for the flaps, and we'll pop those open. That's what they say in the instructions. There's no way to pop them open without doing that, and obviously I wouldn't recommend trying to pry them open or do something like that. Just do what it says and do it the correct way. And actually, one thing I can do real quick is just to go ahead and install this first one, and that'll help kind of hold it on there while I do this other stuff. So let's go ahead and get this guy in there, So I guess this is a good time to take a quick look at the wiring and such, which is in here in this access area. Here is where your battery is going to attach. They give you some Velcro belts or straps. They also give you some additional Velcro here to, if you want to stick it on the bottom of your battery, obviously to help it stick it down, and then also use the straps. Then here's all the wiring, and I need to be careful because they do have it bundled. All right, so there's our wiring. And everything is nicely marked so you know where it goes. Obviously here we got the flaps. Oops, here's the flaps. We have our gear marked, our rudder, elevator, ailerons. Of course, here's our battery and our throttle, ESC. And I'm not really sure what this little guy right here is. We'll figure that out. All right, so let me go ahead and I'll get my receiver out and install. I'll just put it up here so I can get the flaps going, and then we'll pop these out and install this rear section here. All right, guys, well, are you ready for this? Here we go with our air brakes. Pretty cool. Okay, so the hole is right here. Maybe a little bit difficult to see because of the angle, and it's sort of closed up. It doesn't give you the best view. This guy's just going to go in here and be careful. Now that we have those installed, we'll go ahead and close our air brakes. So our next step is to install the elevator. And as I just did, I pulled these two leads coming off of the servo, or these servo connections, which are going to be up in the front of the fuselage here. We have the elevator and the rudder, and then we have this LED light, which is for the tail light section over here. And what's not written in the instructions, which was a little confusing for me because I had to just figure it out, is you need this little, they give you this little lead here, and you're going to need this. So it has an elevator here. This is going to plug into our elevator lead right here. So we'll plug this in like such, get that in there. And then now we have three leads coming off of that. Two of these are going to go to your individual servos. Let me grab the elevator. So that's what we have here. Two of those are going to go to these for each elevator servo. But then what they don't tell you is which one will be for the LED, which plugs into there. I don't think it matters because all you're doing is just powering the LEDs themselves. So it doesn't really matter which one you put it into, I'm assuming. All right, so let me go ahead and get this stuff out of the way. Let me pull this little piece of tape out of here. So let me grab, where's my elevators? Right here. I'll just pick two and go with it. So one there. And it has a little clip. These little connections here have little clips on the ends, which are nice. You have to make sure that they're nice and secure. So make sure I got my wires lined up properly. They're the right color. They're color coded. Brown to brown, red to red, and yellow to yellow. Like so. So again, I see you need to make, and you have, this one's actually black and red from the LED. These are brown, red, and yellow. The brown is the same as the black. Of course, the red's the red. And you'll just have to make sure you line that up properly and put it on the right side, because there's three little prongs in there that you can attach to, and you only have two on the LED. So you just got to make sure you have them in the right spot. It may not be critical, I'm not sure, but I'm just going to go ahead and try to get the black. Well, I will get the black and the brown aligned like this. There it goes, and it snapped in. Okay, that's good. And now we have our rudder, which we'll worry about in just a minute. Okay, so now what we're going to have to do is carefully lay these wires and these connections in this little area that are in between the elevator and also the rudder. There's a couple little slots or channels that are built in that are going to be hollow once you get everything on. And all this is going to have to kind of fit into these two compartments. In the front one up here, the elevator, the elevator is only going to go about to here. So we have a little space that's here that's going to be formed between these two sort of halves. And then in the front part here, we're going to have another little compartment that's going to be below the rudder when it's on. So what I'm going to try to do is just sort of figure this out and make sure that I don't get anything. You don't want to get anything sort of, any of the wires sort of sticking out or pinching off or anything like that. You want to have a nice, obviously you want to have a nice fit, and you don't want to have anything sort of sticking out. So for me, what I figured out to do is I just got some masking tape, as you can see here, and I just bundled this little wire. This is the LED wire coming out of here, and I just taped this guy down into this little compartment here. You don't have a lot of room other than maybe just for one of these connections, and because these connections are, the wires are sort of up in this area, these are all going to have to be up in this compartment here. So now we can go ahead and set our elevator down on top of this. Like so, and again, make sure that no wires are being sort of pinched in between anything. And now we just have one screw, which is going to attach, is going to be the initial attachment for the elevator here. There are two other attachment points, but once the rudder goes on, the screws will go through the rudder, through the elevator, into the connections on the fuselage. So, but this is the only one you need right now to get in here for the elevator. Okay, there's that. Okay, so now we can go ahead and attach our rudder. So again, find my rudder lead, which is right here. Make sure I have my colors lined up. Again, it's going to be brown to brown. Now I know the Futaba connections are black and red and white, and these ones are brown, red, and yellow. So you just have to make sure you know which wires are going where for your system. I'm using a Futaba like I mentioned before. So these guys are going to plug right in here. All right, make sure you hear that snap. Make sure it's nice and secured. And now we can go ahead, and what I'll do is I'll now pack this in here and we'll slide the rudder on top of that. All right, so you can kind of see in here how I packed that in there. You know, you certainly don't have a lot of room in that little compartment, but it does fit. You just have to take your time. And now we'll go ahead and pull this up, and we'll plug our rudder straight down on top of that. Again, making sure we don't get any wires. Like there's this connection, or basically this surface right here is going to sit right down inside here. So you need to make sure that none of the wires are sort of off to the sides. They all have to be within this little channel right here, this little compartment. I'm going to go ahead and look at it from different sides so I make sure nothing is going through, or nothing popping out, I should say. I think I'm pretty good. Okay, just like that. And now we can go ahead and screw in our 3 screws for the rudder. There's going to be one up in the front up here. Right in there. Okay. And now we have to do these ones in the back. Now the next step is to install these scale features. I think I called these both antenna when I did the introduction, but this is actually a pitot tube, and this is an antenna, I believe. This is going to go in the bottom of the fuselage, and then the pitot tube is going to go on the tip of the wing. So for this, there's just a little, there's kind of keys in, there's a little slot in here, and you just push it straight in and then pull it straight back. I suppose you could glue it in if you wanted to, but I think that's pretty stiff, that's pretty sturdy, so I wouldn't worry about that, but you could glue it in with some epoxy or something. And then our pitot tube goes right in here. It screws in. So the next step is to install the battery, but I'm not going to do that right now because we still have to hook up the linkages for all the control surfaces. But I do want to show you the canopy. So let's go ahead and put this stuff in here, get it out of the way for now. And we'll just pop the canopy on. It has a little latch system back here. Here's a little button right here. And then this just plugs in, keys in to the front up here like this. And I'm just going to push this down, and that's it. You just pop it in like that. And push it down and pull this out. So that's pretty nice. Okay, so for our last step for the assembly, before we move on to the setting up the electronics, is we have to install the control rods or the control linkages from the servos to the control surfaces. Now we have a set here. They already have them put together for you. There are ball links on one side, which is going to be onto the control horns. They have a ball link set up there. And then for the servo connection, it's just a Z-bend in the wire here, which is going to plug into the servo arm. And the ones for the rudder and the elevator are going to be these shorter ones, these shorter 3. And of course the other ones, the remaining, are these longer ones here. So before I hook all of these up, the thing I have to do is set up my receiver and make sure that all of the servos are centered and moving in the right direction. You don't want to set up all of these connections and then go back and then set up your radio, because when you do that, there's a chance that you could set up the radio could be initially set up moving in the wrong direction, and you don't want to torque or bend or even break your control surfaces or your control horns or anything like that, and you don't want to stress the servos themselves. So let me go ahead and I will just plug in all the servos and I'll get them centered, and then we'll come back and install all of these. Okay, so this is just going to be for the initial check for the control surfaces. So I'm not going to hook everything up. I'm just going to hook up my control surfaces, my ailerons, my flaps, my elevator, and my rudder. So let me go ahead and start with my aileron, which is going to be channel number 1. That'll go right in here, all the way in. And now I'll just go ahead and plug the rest of these in, and we'll come back and turn it on and center everything. Okay, those are all installed. I don't have a switch on this yet. I'm just going to plug this test battery into this, and we'll go ahead and power all this up. There's that. And you can see, obviously, the LED went on the tip of the wing over there. Okay, so we heard everything sort of pop. Okay, so now we can go ahead and hook all this up. So again, this is a ball link attachment here on the control horn, and then this little Z-bend is going to go into the servo arm. And you need to make sure that you line this up properly. If you look at this closely, the ball on the control horn is on this side of the servo arm, and therefore you need to make sure that your control rod setup is correct. So the ball link connection is here, and then that Z-bend is going to go in from this side. So we carefully need to just plug this in here. Just kind of get it straight in and gently bring it around. You don't want to bend anything. And then of course now we can just go ahead and set up our approximate location here. You can see here that I'm going to have to screw this in a little bit in order to get it to be aligned, at least initially. And of course I'm going to have to make adjustments later. Once I get everything connected, I'll have to go back and just do the fine tuning. But now we can just go ahead and screw this in a few times and get it close, at least for now. Have to work with it a little bit. It's probably right about there, maybe a few more turns. Somewhere right about there. Should just press on. There we go. Now I do have a little tool for working with ball links, but this worked with just my finger pressure. And these guys, the little ball inside actually just screws onto the control horn. So you want to make sure that those are all attached nicely, but there's the first one. So I'll do the rest of these and then we'll come back and take a look. Okay, well everything is now, it's not perfectly adjusted because I have to do that later, but everything is set up and it's very close. And let me go ahead and show you the different control surfaces. I don't have the landing gear hooked up yet, and obviously I don't have the motor hooked up yet, but all the control surfaces are. So let's go ahead and we'll just start with our elevator right here. And it is a dual servo, so you're going to have to make sure that these are aligned with each other. Make sure that's, those are close as possible. Then here is our rudder. Let's move on to our ailerons. And then our flaps and our air brake. Okay, very nice. Now the one thing I did want to point out is the LEDs come on and there's no way to turn them off. If you wanted to figure it out so you can turn them off, I don't know how to do that. You'd have to do something to modify the plane, but I wouldn't suggest doing that unless you knew what you were doing. All right, everybody. Well, now I have the landing gear plugged in, and I hope you're ready for this because this is pretty awesome. I just tested it, and here it goes. Yeah, that looks really nice. Wow. And the sequencing was very cool, how the kind of the doors popped open and then the gear came out. Let's go ahead and put it down now. I guess I should have said put it up. Okay, very nice. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick look at some of the details for the landing gear. And boy, look at that. So you do have your servos for the doors and also for the steering of the front wheel here. Let's check that out real quick. And then also we have some details here for the main landing gear here. And the wheels look very nice. Look at the scale kind of feature, or basically the detail of the wheels. Boy, that looks really nice. Now that the servos are installed, I can now move on to finishing up the installation of the remaining electronics here in this compartment. And also, of course, the battery for the EDF is going to go right up in here. You don't have much leeway with that in terms of where it's going to go. You can shift it back and forth, which we're going to do to find the center of balance, but it's going to go right here. And I'll get that out in just a minute. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is a few things related to some of the wiring. Earlier on in the video, I mentioned this yellow wire that you see here. I wasn't sure what it was, but it turns out that is for your reverse thrust if you're going to use a reverse thrust function on your plane. This is a 6-channel plane for its basic functions, but if you want to have the additional reverse thrust function, you'll need a 7-channel radio, at least a 7-channel radio, and this will plug into one of the empty channels, and you just have to dedicate a switch to it. And then the other thing that you could do if you wanted to is you could separate the leads. I think to separate the leads from the flaps here, there's two leads coming off for the flaps, and I believe you can separate. Yeah, this one has 2 here. You can look into it, but you can separate them so you actually have a dedicated switch for your air brake. Again, you would need another channel for that. So if you wanted to add the reverse thrust and also separate out the air brake, you would need an 8-channel system. Yeah, so again, going back real quick to the flap and air brake option, I believe, and you'd have to check into this, but I believe the 2 that are coming off of this one lead here, which are leading back, I believe these are your flaps, and then the one that's coming off of this, which goes to this little distribution board, that's probably the air brake, but you'd have to just check that out. But again, just disconnect that and you can plug those straight into your receiver on an 8-channel system, and you can have those extra features. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this area generally organized. I'm going to put things where I think they need to be. I'm not going to permanently install any of this until after I do a balance check. So I'm going to get things in here generally where I think they should be, and then I'll check the balance, and then if I have to, I can adjust things around. I mean, really the big thing that's going to control the balance is going to be that giant battery up here in the front. These other smaller components aren't going to have that big of an influence as much as this thing is. This is like a brick. So that's going to be the thing that we move back and forth to get the balance. Most likely that's going to be the controlling weight, if you will, in the system. So everything is now, set in here. Obviously it looks like a big pile of spaghetti because I haven't gotten everything secured where I need it to be, because like I mentioned, I do want to check the balance first. But this is good just to do a little test run to make sure everything is working properly. I have the battery now installed here for the EDF. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and plug it all in, and I'll put the canopy on, and we'll do just a small sort of like test of the EDF. I put a little blast plate back there with the foam from the box because I don't want things blowing around too much. And then I did want to mention that they do give you instructions toward the back, the final steps. They do give you the instructions on how to program and set up the ESC, and also some information on the motor itself. So there's a lot of details in here that I'm not going to go over, but I already set up my transmitter. It was pretty simple. For the Futaba, at least the Futaba that I have, I have to set it for a reverse. I have to set the throttle in the reverse position, and then all you have to do is, and I'll just briefly mention it, is you turn it all on, and you have it in the up position. You turn it all on, it locates the top position, the high, and then you get a couple of beeps, and then you move it to the low position, and then you get a couple more beeps, and then you're done. It's very simple. And then the final thing we can do now is just put our drop tanks on. They will add, they will add drag. They don't add any weight. They're foam themselves, so they're not going to add any weight. They are marked right and left, and they do just plug into, there's little slots here on the wings. You just push them in and then pull them back, and they just slide into position. I'm going to assume that the lightning bolt goes on the outside. So this is right, so that makes sense. So we'll push this guy in. There it goes. Kind of stiff. You have to push it down because there is a curve in the wing, and you just have to make sure you push it down to get it to engage. So just be careful. Now we can move on to perhaps the final major step in the setup, and that is finding the center of balance for the plane. They give you a little diagram and instructions here on the back. Do not take this step lightly. This is a very serious step. You want to make sure you follow this as they show you here. And what they do here is they show you a little diagram, and they're showing you that the center of balance is 180 to 190 millimeters from the leading edge where it touches the fuselage back. And you're going to mark a couple of spots on the bottom of the wing, and those are going to be your balancing points. And you're going to hold it up with your fingers, or if you have some other commercially available device like a balancing device, but you're going to basically hold it up and get that balance. And then you want to make sure that the plane is balanced correctly, and then you're going to adjust that by moving stuff around here in your compartment up here. Again, that big battery up in the front, that's going to be probably the main thing that you're going to be looking at, moving that back and forth to get that right balance. So when it comes to the balancing of your plane, you want to be very, very careful and make sure that you do not end up with it being tail heavy. If it's level or if it's slightly nose heavy, that's okay, but you do not want it to be tail heavy. So take your time and make sure that is correct, and check it and double check it. If you have a tail heavy airplane, it'll be hard to control and unstable, and it's better to have a little bit of a nose heavy airplane than a tail heavy. So just check that and be super, super careful. So what I'm going to do for my balance location, I'm going to choose the average, the middle. So again, it's 180 to 190 millimeters. So the average of that's going to be 185 millimeters. I have a little ruler here with centimeters on it, and it has my millimeter markings here. So that's going to be right here at 185 millimeters. Now the thing about this is I can go ahead and measure it from here like it says and line it up like as it says here, and so that measuring point is going to be somewhere right about in here. So you can do it that way. If you have an square like this, and if it's metric, you can just use it straight as is. But basically what I did is I just measured, just to confirm it, 185 millimeters like that. So now I have my square set up correctly. And now what I can do is just gently kind of put it right on the leading edge like that, and not have to worry about sort of the curvature. And now I can measure exactly where I think it should be, which is right there. It's basically at this line. And I'm just going to use a Sharpie. And again, I'm just going to go ahead and gently put it up here on the leading edge, somewhere right about there. And that mark will be right there. I'm just going to put a nice dot there. And it's okay to leave that there because you can check it from time to time. So there's my measuring point right there, my balancing point. And I'll mark the other one on the other side. Now both locations are marked, and I'll flip it up and I'll balance it. It can be hard to see that on the video, so I'll just check it. And again, you want to make sure you're checking the balance with the gear up, because that's going to be how the plane is flying for the most part. Okay, so the plane is now pretty much set up and ready for its first flight. I will have to do some minor adjustments. I will check the balance like I mentioned before, and I will check the throws and make sure everything is good for my high and low settings for my control surfaces. But the plane is essentially ready to go. So just for a quick overview, I felt this was a pretty easy model to assemble. There were only about 13 sort of major steps, if you want to call them that, to get everything set up on it, including setting up the ESC. It went together very nicely. The fit was nice. Everything went where it should have gone per the instructions. There was not a lot of guesswork. There were a few little things I had to look into. For example, I wasn't aware of that yellow wire, which was the reverse thrust. I wasn't familiar with that, so I had to look that up because it didn't mention that in the instructions. And maybe a few other little things, but they were very minor, and overall it went together very nicely. So again, this is a PNP, and out of the box, my opinion is that this is a very nice representation of the F-86. It looks very scale to me. I didn't measure anything to check how scale it is, but to me, looking at it from just this distance and checking it out, it looks very scale to me. It has a lot of scale features. It has the cannons in the front. It has recessed panel lines. It has a lot of detail on there. And of course, you know, like I mentioned, if you want to use the stencils, you have to look up the information on that because they don't provide it for you. I wish they did, but they don't. But you can find sources where you can see where the stencils go and take a little bit of time to do that if you're interested, and that will add another level of detail to it. A few other things, you know, I really like the landing gear. The landing gear and the wheels look really nice. And overall, it's a very nice looking plane, and it is a great representation of the F-86 in my opinion. I was able to find an actual picture of the Huff in one of my references here, and I'll kind of show that to you. Maybe kind of hard to pick up on that, but you can do a search online and find a few more pictures of the actual Huff, and it is out there. So check those out if you're interested. So as I'm coming to the end of this video, I did want to mention something about our model aviation hobby. Now, I've always built balsa planes. I've built from kits. I'm building one off of a set of plans over here as well. I've always powered them using glow engines or gas engines. And that's what I've always done, and that's been my main focus and passion in the hobby over many years. I do want to broaden my horizons a little bit and actually build a jet kit. I want to build a balsa jet kit. I'm going to be doing that soon. It's going to be powered by an EDF. And I was fortunate to get the opportunity to do a review of a few EDF jets, and so I'm learning about these as I do that. And so that being said, I just wanted to mention that I realize that everybody is doing something a little bit different. There are people that are flying ARFs, there are people that are building planes, there are people that are building or flying, you know, planes and helicopters that are gas powered or glow powered or electric powered, turbine jets, EDFs. There's foam planes like this that you can buy out of the box like this one, or you can get ARFs, and so on and so on. It keeps going and going and going. To me, it's all good, and I think it all contributes to our hobby. So the reason I'm saying all this and blabbering on is because no matter what your focus is or no matter what your preference is in the hobby, the bottom line is, as a product, in my opinion, this is a high quality airplane, and it is just that. It's got great detail, it's built well, it's sturdy, and I think it looks great. And really, I think it is a high quality product. So again, this is the FMS 80mm EDF F-86 Sabre, and I plan on doing a test flight with this in the near future, so stay tuned for that video. Okay, well, that's enough of all that, and so please stay tuned to my channel. I'm going to be jumping back onto my Aeromite build. I'm finishing up that plane, and I have a few more steps to get that plane finished up and do the maiden flight on the Aeromite, so check that out if you're interested. So until then, thanks for watching my channel. I really appreciate you all tagging along for this, which I think is probably a long video, so thank you for tagging along with this. I hope it was helpful. And again, if you're interested in this FMS plane or other planes by FMS, check out their website. They have a lot of them, and I think this is a really cool model, and I can recommend it highly. All right, so that's it. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.